Hello guys, welcome back. In today's video, we're going to learn about electrolysis of your Edexcel IGCSE Chemistry. Now, first of all, we need to know why a substance can or cannot conduct electricity. In metals, which have metallic bonding, metals, of course, they can conduct electricity because the delocalized electrons are free to move around. Metals simply mean, let's say, magnesium solid, aluminum solid. Such metals are able to conduct electricity because the delocalized electrons are free to move around. This is a very important information and you should remember it. For ionic compounds, if they are solid, they cannot conduct electricity because the ions are not free to move around, because the ions, inside an ionic compound, when they are solid, they are held together very strongly by electrostatic attraction between positive and negative ions. However, if we apply strong heat to the solid ionic compound, it will become molten, which means that it becomes melted, or if it is dissolved in water, meaning that it becomes aqueous, the ionic compound will be able to conduct electricity because the ions become free to move around. So again, very important information to remember here. Now, covalent compounds cannot conduct electricity at all because if you can see here, the electrons are held tightly together very strongly by the covalent bonds, meaning that the electrons are not free to move around. Now, in summary, metals can conduct electricity because of the delocalized electrons are free to move around. Ionic compounds can conduct electricity if they are molten or if they are dissolved in water, and the reason why is that the ions become free to move around. Now, ionic compounds can't conduct electricity if they are solid because the ions are held tightly together in the lattice by very strong electrostatic attraction. Now, covalent compounds cannot conduct electricity at all because the electrons are held tightly together by covalent bonds so that the electrons are not free to move around. So the error that students tend to make here is the reason why different compounds will conduct electricity. For metals, it is because of delocalized electrons. For ionic compounds, it is because of ions. So molten or dissolved in water is represented as, let's say, if we're talking about sodium chloride, it would be sodium chloride aqueous, while sodium chloride solid would simply be solid. So sodium chloride solid won't be able to conduct electricity, while molten or dissolved sodium chloride in water would be able to conduct electricity because the ions become free to move around. Pause this video and make sure that you are absorbing information because a lot of questions do ask from here. Alright, so let's learn about positive ions and negative ions. In the periodic table, we have learned before that this is group 1, group 2, group 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and this is either group 8 or group 0. So the positive ions, the cations, are all the metals on the left side of your standard line except hydrogen, and the negative ions are the elements on the right hand side of the standard line, which are non-metals. For these ones, if they are in the group 1 of the periodic table, their charges are +1, +2, +3, +4. But starting from group 5, we are going to gain electrons to get to the noble gas electronic structure. So this will become -3, -2, -1, and noble gases are 0 because they have no tendency to gain or lose electrons. So for the transition metals here, you do not have any charges on here to remember by because they are different from one to another. And that is why it is very important for you to learn the ionic charges of some anions and cations, which will become very useful in your IGCSE chemistry. So pause this video now and try to learn all of these by heart because they will become extremely important and necessary. Now, if you are asked to describe what is a cation, you can simply say that ions with a positive charge are called cations. Similarly, if you are asked about anions, it will be ions with negative charges are called anions. Again, I would like to remind that if your element is within group 1 to 7 on the periodic table, you can know the charges on them by just simply looking at your periodic table, but you need to learn these anions and cations special charges in order for you to do electrolysis. Now, let's talk about electrolysis. Electrolysis simply means it is a chemical change which is caused by passing electric current through an electrolyte, which is either molten or aqueous solution. We can also say that electrolysis is a breakdown or decomposition of a compound. For example, if we have sodium chloride molten or dissolved in water, it will be broken down into Na plus and Cl minus. Hence, it is called breakdown or decomposition. Now, an electrolyte, it is the liquid, molten or aqueous substance which is going to allow this electricity to pass through it. The electrodes are the conducting electric poles, these two poles, through which the electric current can either enter or leave the electrolyte. So, for electrodes, please do not make careless mistakes. The positive electrodes are called anodes, and the negative electrodes are called cathodes. A good way to remember them is by learning PANIC. Positive for anode and negative is cathode. Do not confuse with ions. Positive ions are called cations and negative ions are called anions. And the positive ions, cations, will always be attracted to cathode or the negative electrode in a electrolysis, and the negative ions or anions will always be attracted to the positive electrode, anodes, in an electrolysis. Now, these electrodes are made of either carbon, graphite, or platinum because they are chemically inert, which means that they won't react with other substances. This is also a very important information to remember because in exams they always ask, why do you use carbon or platinum, or suggest an element you should use for electrode, and this should be your answer. Alright, so that is all for the introduction to electrolysis video, and we will see again in part 2.